Welcome to the Matt Sager Podcast. It's Tuesday, February 19th of 2019 here in New York City. And I apologize if once again I sound a little bit congested. I'm totally fine now. The medical stuff I was referring to earlier this week and much of last week, it's basically gone. But I did get it looked at today to get assurance that it was gone. And in the process, they take these tubes that I think are like connected to cameras, they can do imaging, while they run and sort of dangle this wire as it goes in through one nostril and out the other. And it sounds like, given the right circumstances, if you're at a party, someone's like, hey, you want to do the thing where you put a camera up your nose and then it comes out the other side? Like, it could be fun. But in a medical environment, it's very scientific. There was no partying going on. It wasn't a rave. No one had any ecstasy. It was just a very clinical, hey, let me look all the way up your nostrils and out the other side. And sorry about that, but they're going to be a bit swollen for the next day. So the good news is the test proved I'm basically fine now. The bad news is I don't sound it, so I apologize. Now, for a change, I'll start with a non sequitur, out of nowhere, because I've never had occasion to say this, but boy, am I feeling it today. I am so glad to not be Jussie Smollett, if that's how you pronounce his name. If not, I apologize. But so he's the success story. He broke huge after trying to be an actor. I've only heard bits and pieces of the story, but he essentially went from like a couple of extra parts here and there, and basically, like many actors are, spending his time working in the hopes that one day something would break big, and one day something did. For the past, I think, 3 years, he's been the star of Empire, and I've never watched that show. It's not because it doesn't look good, or that it's not to my tastes. It looks like it's quite good, although, there is now this weird sort of dark shadow over it because of the controversy I'll get to in a moment. But it does look good. I've been interested in watching it, but if you had told me 10 years ago that there would be this many amazing TV shows, streaming services, movies, DVD re-releases, that I wouldn't even begin to have even half the time needed to absorb like a third of what's out there, let alone everything good. So people are always going, oh, check this out. Oh, check that out. And I always love the referrals. My friends and my audience have great tastes. But, there's only 24 hours in a day. I've got to eat. If all you did was try and rank great shows on Netflix, and in so doing, you made it a comprehensive viewing of all of them, you die of old age before you were halfway through. And that doesn't even include the properties that ended up landing on Netflix, seeing them in the theater, or the stuff that's original on Hulu and Amazon Prime, or just the stuff that's on network or cable TV. So Empire, it's well reviewed. Again, I know nothing about it, except I did learn today that it is co-produced, or was co-created rather, by Danny Strong. If that name rings a bell to you, this is who Danny Strong is. This is how he got his start in entertainment. He's obviously now a huge, big behind-the-scenes guy, but began as an actor, and this is what he was like.
Is Buffy Summers here tonight? Did she, this is actually a new category. It's the first time ever. I guess there were a lot of write-in ballots, and, the prom committee asked me to read this. We're not good friends. Most of us never found the time to get to know you, but that doesn't mean we haven't noticed you. We don't talk about it much, but it's no secret that Sunnydale High isn't really like other high schools. A lot of weird stuff happens here.
Zombies!
Hyena people!
Snyder!
But whenever there was a problem or something creepy happened, you seemed to show up and stop it. Most of the people here have been saved by you, or helped by you at one time or another. We're proud to say that the class of '99 has the lowest mortality rate of any graduating class in Sunnydale history.
That's right, Danny Strong, before he was co-creator of Empire, before he had a role on Billions, he was Jonathan Levinson, a tangential yet at the same time pivotal character on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and that was him giving a lovely award to Buffy and her prom for helping to keep the mortality rate low in Sunnydale High. A real feat, actually, when you consider the town's history. I won't get all into it, but suffice it to say that everything in some form or another, just as it once was with Kevin Bacon, everything can now be tied back to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is not shocking when you think about Joss Whedon and his journey from that show to being a guy who's fighting off offers to do Batgirl, who reluctantly accepts the Justice League but is no longer even willing to work on the Avengers. He's gotten very, very big. He seems to have outgrown nearly every role life's thrown at him. And the same seems to be true with many of the cast members. It's certainly true of many of the writers on Buffy. That was a real sort of almost training camp for talent. So, but yes, in addition to acting, which he still does, Danny Strong is co-creator of Empire, and Jussie Smollett, I'm going to say, has been up to this point, played one of the leading roles on that show. I'm guessing that's over. This is very upsetting. So a couple of nights ago in Chicago, Jussie Smollett walked into a police station with a rope, a noose around his neck, and went into great detail describing two people who attacked him, said, "This is MAGA country." And as someone who's not only a person of color, but a very openly gay man, he said, "Yeah, they said MAGA this, MAGA that. They were down on me for being black. They were down on me for being gay." And he went into great elaborate detail, but cops suspected him from the beginning of lying. The thing is, why would you lie about something like that? What could you possibly have to gain? I don't know the answer, but the reason they doubted him was that he was still wearing the noose as he described the incident. And he was very angry, but also very coherent, not behaving like someone who just suffered a horrible hate attack. And, it's everything in me. It's taking everything I've got to not just say, this poor man, why are we even considering questioning him? But it turns out the two men who he confirmed were his accused attackers. They've both worked on the show as extras. One of them was his personal trainer for a while. And they just said, listen, we didn't know we were going to end up in prison. He coached us several days ago. The two brothers were interviewed both separately and together, and their stories aligned 100%. That he knew us from Empire, where we work, where we've trained him, where we've stood in for him as stunt people, and where we've served as extras. We've known him for a really long time. We certainly are not about MAGA, and we are absolutely not about violent attacks on coworkers. And apparently their story held up very well. They were immediately released. They cooperated fully with the police, answered every question. And the more questions that were asked and answered, the more it became apparently very, very clear. And if it turns out I'm wrong for believing this narrative, one that now seems just about indisputable, I'll apologize. Because there's nothing like being attacked. It's horrible. No one deserves it, but what is really upsetting about Mr. Smollett and his attack, or fake attack, if indeed it was fake, which it really does look that way, what on earth does he stand to gain from this? It's not as though his TV and acting career is in any kind of a slump or in need of resuscitation. He's fine. This is bad, negative attention, and done so sloppily that he seems to have been caught basically overnight. I mean, these poor people who work on the show, who he claims were his attackers, and who he apparently paid to simulate an attack on him, they spent 2 days in jail. And if you do that to innocent people, doesn't matter how much you pay them to attack you, they will spill. And spill they did, and spill they should. Because sadly, it is all too often the case that any kind of marginalized figure, person of color, homosexual, it is all too common for cops to dismiss attacks on them. And the only thing that can make matters worse, there's nothing like people who attack others, particularly based on race, sexuality, stuff like that. There's nothing that they love more than the narrative that kind of stuff never happens. It's a hoax. It's identity politics. They're playing the victim. They're lying. And when you consider the hundreds of thousands of cases like this every day that are not done by celebrities and in which the police, law enforcement, judges, etc., don't have a great track record all the time in every city or state of necessarily believing, let alone defending or seeking justice for the victim of an attack. So the only thing you can do to make this worse is to be a high-profile gay man and a person of color and fake, obviously fake, an attack on yourself. The only motive I can see, because I've been spending the last couple of days as it's become more and more clear. The cops, first of all, let the suspects go. They want to talk to Smollett. They just want to have an interview with him. And suddenly the guy who walked into a police station with a rope around his neck and this very elaborate, detailed story and a bunch of interviews he did in which he said he was so angry and so pissed. And listen, I don't love Trump. I really dislike him a lot. But it does seem the only motive that would make any sense, because of the detail of MAGA this and MAGA that, would be to try and in some way insult or shine an ugly light, one of lies, on Trump supporters who, I've got a couple friends who I can talk to, but generally speaking, they are not a great bunch. But it doesn't help to lie about them either. Makes you no better than them or anyone else. And as far as this acting career, which he worked so long and hard to make it a reality, this is going to destroy it. No one wants to work with someone who was exhibiting mental illness or who just lies and isn't afraid to hurt his coworkers in the process. These extras on Empire, one of whom was Smollett's personal trainer for a while, when they took money to do a side gig with him, they didn't think they were going to end up in prison with this guy. Did he think they were not going to flip? It's impossible for me to understand what he was thinking. But I will say, to the extent that such a thing can be done, he's made things much, much worse for people of color, people in the LGBTQ community, to expect to be believed, because he's just done this high-profile case that lasted for a week and a half before the cops finally said, yeah, looks like this was all just self-inflicted nonsense. That hurts a lot of people. That ripples out. That will have an effect. How many cops who've been keeping up with this now very high-profile case, next time a gay and or black man or woman walks into their police station, they could very easily be thinking of, oh, right, yeah, she read the article about Jussie Smollett, and that's why she's playing the victim. I'm not saying that's how they should react. Jussie Smollett is one man, and his illnesses and whatever drove him to do this are clearly unique to him. But I don't know that every law enforcement officer is going to believe that. This story is going to be fresh in their minds for the weeks and months to come, and it can really, really hurt people. And as for Smollett himself, he's refusing to talk to cops, and as a result, he's being written out of the show. Not completely. It's not a total House of Cards thing. But Danny Strong, little Jonathan, last seen on the Seal of Danzelthar, bleeding out. Sorry, a little nerdy Buffy the Vampire Slayer trivia for you there. Things don't end super well for Jonathan. But he issued this scathing statement condemning the attackers, as did many people. No one ever thought, oh, we better make sure this isn't a lie. They heard about this horrific attack on a man who works in the entertainment industry, who's a person of color and who's homosexual and who's open about that. And of course they would condemn it. If anyone asked me, I'd have condemned it. And now I'd be in a very awkward position. And if I were a showrunner or a casting director, I would look at the news that's coming out, and obviously the verdict is not in. But the fact that he's hiding from cops and allowing himself to be written off the show, something that he could avoid simply by telling the story again in full to the police. It looks pretty bad. And I would begin thinking, all right, I'm removing him from my Rolodex. It's 2019. I would remove him from my contacts on my iMac and my phone. I would not want to work with Jussie Smollett again, if for no other reason than to protect his coworkers, who he apparently is known to pay for what they believe to be some kind of stunt or hoax or whatever, and then they end up in prison. He's a dangerous man, clearly. And in fact, news came out today from a Chicago station, I think it was the NBC affiliate in Chicago, that in 2007, here we go, this is from NBCChicago.com, Empire actor Jussie Smollett pled guilty to DUI and providing false information to law enforcement in 2007. That is just, okay. Once is odd, twice is the beginnings of a pattern. And again, I can't begin to fathom the motivation for it. His acting career was going very well. He did not need the attention. And it's not as though this was some kind of good publicity for him. He went from being a victim to being a con artist and a liar in the public eye in like 72 hours. And it looks as though it's only going to get worse for him, and that probably by the end of this season, if the story plays out the way it appears it's going to, he'll be written off the show. Maybe the show itself will be canceled. And like that idiot Roseanne, thankfully her show eventually came back without her as the Connors. But much like Roseanne, his mental illnesses could cause the show to shut down, ending lots of jobs for his fellow cast members, the crew, set designers, receptionists, production assistants, writers, all out of work because of this guy's mental illness. And again, I'm extrapolating that as the most likely outcome because it is. Unless there's a miracle. And until he talks to the police, it seems as though, if nothing else, one of the stars of Empire, who worked so hard to get here, will be written off the show. And we're not likely to see him again. He may show up on like a Celebrity Fit Club reality show in 10 years, but otherwise he's done, again, barring an interview with the police in which he is able to explain what happened. But it's looking very bad for him. And I mean, not just losing his job bad. Lying to the police is a crime. He can go to prison. And again, I cannot even begin to fathom what he must have been thinking. It is the act of a madman. Unless there was something going on behind the scenes at Empire, of which I'm unaware, that his character was at risk of being written off the show somehow. But even then, this is not how you solve matters. But it does appear that things were fine for him. And then he had this cockamamie idea. Sounds like something that drugs might have had a hand in, maybe. Just this terrible judgment. The worst idea in the world. Nothing to gain and everything to lose. And to bring unknowing accomplices. And to abandon them to the police in 48 hours in jail. That's just horrible. So on another note, talking about what we've been talking about a lot on the Matt Sager podcast, Avengers Endgame. It turns out that for one reason or another, lots and lots of rumors as to what might be going on with the various members of the Avengers. But this will be the last Marvel movie featuring Gwyneth Paltrow as Pepper Potts or as anyone else. She's done. In speaking with Variety about a lot of things, not just Avengers Endgame, but she did mention that it was her last movie for Marvel. And what she said about the specifics for it were interesting as to why she's leaving Marvel. She says, quote, I mean, I'm a bit old to be in a suit and all that at this point. I feel very lucky that I did it because I actually got talked into it. I was friends with Jon Favreau, who of course directed Iron Man. It was such a wonderful experience making the first Iron Man, and then to watch how important it has become to fans. So Gwyneth Paltrow is of the belief that she's too old to be any kind of superhero, which is interesting when you consider that Robert Downey Jr. is like 8 or 9 years her senior, and he's doing just fine. Although, again, to those rumors, and I think I've mentioned on this podcast before that he was asked about his future at Marvel not long ago, and he had an answer that was at once kind of smarmy and 100% true. It's like humility is a admirable trait, but if you've really got something to say and you want to say it plainly, sometimes you got to be upfront about it, which Downey was. The interviewer said something to the effect of, you're now the face of Marvel, you're Iron Man, you're in the Avengers. How long do you think this is going to continue for you? How many more of these movies do you have in you? And rather than say, oh, well, my contract's almost up, or who knows what they have in store for Tony, he said, well, I'd like to point out that I am a scion of Hollywood royalty. As a kid, I played cards with legendary actors and actresses. I was born into a very classy and very deeply respected family, and my image in the community, which for a while there in the 90s was quite bad, is now once again impeccable. And taking all that into account, looking at myself as an adult moving forward, there's a real limit that's coming up, at which point I'm going to have to say, I'm sorry, I'm not dressing up as Iron Man anymore. I am no longer comfortable being the face of the Marvel Universe. And that is probably at least part of what is motivating some of these Infinity War rumors. Although not all. And not all of them are even about Iron Man. I'm worried about Iron Man and the Avengers because, well, first off, without Pepper, that's troubling. When a big tertiary cast member, one who is as tremendously important to Iron Man as Pepper, leaves, that is a sign that maybe they're starting to pack things up and get ready to go. But I was worried already because of the Spider-Man Far From Home trailer. In Spider-Man Homecoming, and before that, in Captain America Civil War, the Marvel Cinematic Universe versions of Tony Stark, Iron Man, and Peter Parker, Spider-Man, were very familial. Stark treated him as an apprentice, gave him all this cool technology. Spider-Man had been running around in like underoos and a bad Halloween mask. Tony pimped his costume out and monitored him, took a real interest in his life and career, and stayed involved, and was sort of a mentor who felt that any injury that happened to Peter was his fault. That is how deep their relationship was, how close partners, what kind of a mentor-student relationship they had. Now, if you look at any trailer for Spider-Man Far From Home, you see a lot of Happy. Happy, who is basically the heir apparent to Stark Industries. Not in the comics, and in the movies almost exclusively because he's also played by Jon Favreau, who had such a huge role in Iron Man that he could write himself into the movies, and more power to him. But if Spider-Man is still working with Stark Industries, and the guy he's meeting with is Happy, you don't see Pepper, and you certainly don't see Tony. That, to me, well, first off, giving credit to the people who design these trailers and the people with whom they work, executives and writers and directors and producers who hand down edicts like, all right, in this movie about this character, you can't include this other character. Especially since the next Spider-Man movie, after all, is coming out from Sony, and Iron Man, like most Marvel properties, are owned by Marvel and Disney. But it is worth noting, as I said, to not see Tony at all, and yet to see Happy again and again and again, that speaks to the idea that maybe Tony, for one reason or another, will not be around at the time of this movie. Now, no spoiler there, because that was just pure idle speculation, but take it for what it's worth. In the meantime, Gwyneth may be too old to dress up as a superhero, but she's not too old to have a 250 million pseudoscience website that I really believe. I don't mean to shit on Gwyneth Paltrow. I think she's a great actress, and I've met her like once or twice for 5 seconds. She seems like a very, very kind-hearted, open-hearted, nice person. But this goop, this is the story you undoubtedly have heard about in the last couple of years, about these jade eggs that women buy. I think she called them yoni eggs. But they were jade eggs that she said would give you bladder control and control over your vaginal muscles if you took this giant egg and just implanted it there, kept it in there for as long as you could. And she has so many devoted followers who do anything she says, pay any amount of money for any crazy sounding idea. She was eventually fined. She was fined $145,000 specifically, not even for all the other crazy nutty stuff she sells on that website or for any of the misinformation she gives out. She was fined $145,000 simply for the vaginal eggs alone. So it is very hard for me, knowing that, to look at her, and yes, you do separate the art from the artist, but she's hardly a role model when you think about the evil that she does behind the scenes, however well-intentioned it may be. It may just be that she really believes she's smarter than anyone else, and contrary to every scientist, every doctor, anyone who does anything to regulate business, medically or otherwise, says she's very dangerous. She feels otherwise, and Goop is apparently worth $250 million. I wouldn't be doing any Pepper Potts appearances either if I had a company of that value, but I also would not advise anyone to stick giant eggs anywhere inside their person. But so that is the state of the world today. Empire's got a big question mark hanging over its future, as does Jussie Smollett. And Gwyneth Paltrow's going to be fine, regardless of whether she appears in another Marvel movie. She's got 250 mil easy that we know of, and her empire only continues to grow and thrive. So get in touch with the Matt Sager podcast, why don't you? You may email me, matt@mattsager.com, or call me, 646-535-4788. And you can get me all across social media, too. On Twitter, I'm @MattSager. Instagram, I'm Real Matt Sager. And on Facebook, I've got a bunch of pages. My personal page is The Matt Sager. My voiceover page is Matt Sager VO. And this podcast page is Matt Sager Podcast. Also, check out the links in the description for tonight's podcast episode, where you can find links to my Patreon, patreon.com/Matt Sager. And I'd really love some suggestions from you, because I got a couple of rewards up there, but I'd really like to offer more. So tell me what you'd like me to offer, and I'll probably do it. There's also a link in tonight's episode description to my merch store, my lovely friends at wehavemerch.com. where you can get Matt Sager Podcast t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, and stickers. I'd also love recommendations about more merch to sell, so really, get in touch with me. For everything else to do with me, my voiceover reels, contact info, articles, blog posts, and even back episode archives of this podcast, you can find all of that at my website, mattsagervoiceover.com.